she was invisible to most, just the maid in the corner, cleaning up messes no one cared to notice. But the night masked men stormed the mansion. Her silence became her shield. While panic spread like wildfire, she didn't scream, didn't run. Instead, she made a move that stunned everyone, one that would expose not just the robbers, but a truth far darker than the crime itself. What could a woman, dismissed her entire life because of her skin and her status, possibly do that would change everything? Her name was Rosa, though in the mansion where she worked, few ever bothered to use it. To the wealthy family she served, she was simply the maid, a quiet presence moving through the halls with a rag in her hand and a bowed head. She had spent years cleaning their floors, polishing their silver, and serving their guests. Yet she remained invisible, a shadow in her own workplace. What most never knew was that Rosa's world outside those gates was nothing like the luxury she dusted every day. She lived in a cramped apartment across town, where peeling paint and flickering lights were the norm. Every paycheck was stretched thin rent, groceries, and what little she could send back home to her family, who still lived in poverty. And yet, through every insult disguised as a joke, through every suspicious glance that lingered a little too long on her darker skin, Rosa endured. She told herself she was strong, that she could survive the whispers, the dismissals, the way people looked past her as though she wasn't there. But deep down, she knew the world had already judged her, believing that women like her belonged only in kitchens and laundry rooms, never in places of respect. What Rosa couldn't have known was that the very night she blended into the background once again, her life would shift in ways no one expected. Because when chaos broke into that mansion, the woman they dismissed as powerless would become the only one with the courage to act. The night began like any other. Rosa moved quietly through the mansion, stacking dishes after dinner, her back aching from a double shift. Laughter echoed from the grand living room where the family entertained wealthy friends. To them, she was invisible, just the maid who slipped in and out of rooms without a sound. But Rosa had learned to read people, and she could feel it. The same dismissive glances, the subtle smirks at her accent, the way her dark skin marked her as different. She carried it in silence, the weight of being seen yet unseen. Then the quiet shattered. A crash at the front door. Shouts. Heavy boots storming inside. 4 masked men rushed in, waving weapons, their voices sharp and commanding. The guests screamed, dropping glasses, stumbling over furniture in panic. The millionaire host shouted orders, trying to take control, but his voice cracked with fear. Rosa froze at first, clutching the tray in her hands. She had seen chaos before, poverty, violence, desperation, but nothing like this. The robbers demanded money, jewelry, anything of value. They forced the guests to the ground, their expensive clothes now dusted with fear. Yet, amid the terror, Rosa noticed something. No one looked at her. Not the robbers, not the guests, not even the family she had served for years. To them, she was still invisible, even in crisis. One of the men shoved the millionaire to the floor, pressing a gun to his temple. The room erupted in sobs, but Rosa's mind raced. She knew where the safes were, where the valuables were hidden. secrets learned after years of cleaning corners no one else saw. She also knew that if the robbers realized her knowledge, she could become their target. But the injustice ran deeper than the guns. As fear gripped the room, she heard whispers, panicked voices muttering that maybe the maid had something to do with it. The suspicion cut sharper than the weapons. Even as she stood trembling in the corner, as helpless as everyone else, their first instinct was to blame her, the woman with darker skin, the one who didn't belong in their eyes. The robbers barked orders, dragging people toward the ground. Rosa's heart pounded as one of the men turned his masked face toward her. For a split second, their eyes locked. He hesitated, then moved past her as though she weren't even there. Invisibility had always been her burden. Tonight it could be her weapon. She crept toward the kitchen, unnoticed amid the chaos. Every step was a risk, every movement a gamble. In her mind, memories flared, times she had been accused of stealing tips that never existed, the day a neighbor called her trouble for standing in the wrong place, the countless moments when her worth was measured by nothing but prejudice. Now, surrounded by luxury and terror, she had a choice: stay invisible and survive, or act and risk everything. Her hand tightened around the metal serving tray. Her pulse thundered. The robbers were closing in on the guests, growing more violent with each demand. Rosa's eyes darted to the back door. Freedom was just steps away. She could vanish, run into the night, and no one would remember her in the morning. But as the screams grew louder, Rosa knew escape wasn't the answer. The people who dismissed her ignored her, even suspected her. They were still human, still trapped, still in danger. And if she did nothing, the night would end in blood. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. The woman they never noticed was about to do something no one expected. The room felt frozen in terror, every second stretched thin by the sound of a gun cocking. One of the robbers shoved the millionaire harder against the marble floor, threatening to end his life if more valuables weren't handed over. Guests whimpered, clutching each other, their jeweled hands trembling. Rosa's breath was shallow, her palms slick with sweat as she clutched the tray she had carried in unnoticed. Then chaos within chaos. One of the robbers spotted her creeping near the kitchen. His voice cut like a blade. "You! What are you hiding?" Heads turned. Dozens of eyes locked on Rosa. For the first time that night, she wasn't invisible. She was exposed. And in that instant, suspicion roared to life. "Of course it's her," one of the guests muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "She probably let them in." The words spread like wildfire. The same people who had dismissed her all these years now pointed their fear and hatred at her. To them, she wasn't a victim, she was the suspect. The robber yanked her forward, pressing cold steel against her temple. Gasps echoed through the mansion. Rosa's legs buckled, but her spirit hardened. She could feel every injustice of her life tightening around her throat, the accusations, the mockery, the endless reminders that her worth was less. But in that crucible of fear, something inside her refused to break. With one swift motion, Rosa swung the tray upward, slamming it into the robber's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Panic exploded. Guests screamed, robbers cursed, and in the chaos, Rosa dove for the weapon, her body trembling yet unyielding. For the first time in her life, she was no longer a shadow. She was the center. In the blur of movement and shouts, the power shifted, and everyone in that room, for the first time, saw her for who she truly was. But the question remained, would they remember her bravery tomorrow, or would the world still brand her as nothing more than the Maid? Sirens wailed in the distance as the robbers scattered, their plan shattered by the one woman no one expected to fight back. The police stormed in, handcuffing the men as guests clung to each other in disbelief. Rosa stood trembling, the weight of the gun she had disarmed still heavy in her hands, until an officer gently took it away. For the first time, every pair of eyes in that mansion turned to her, not with dismissal, not with suspicion, but with awe. The same guests who had mocked her accent, ignored her presence, or whispered doubts about her loyalty, now whispered a different word: hero. But Rosa knew the truth. Hero or not, the scars of prejudice don't vanish in a single night. She had been strong, yes. She had been brave. But she should never have had to prove her humanity in such a way. The injustice she faced daily, the suspicion, the disrespect, the invisibility, was a quieter violence than guns, yet just as destructive. That night, she walked out of the mansion changed. Not because she was suddenly seen, but because she had shown the world that dignity and courage don't belong to the wealthy, the powerful, or the privileged. They belong to those who refuse to be broken, even when the world insists on looking away. Rosa's story is not just about one woman in one mansion. It's about millions whose strength is overlooked, whose worth is questioned, simply because of the color of their skin or the work they do. So the question remains, how many more Rosas will it take before society learns to see people for who they are, instead of who prejudice says they should be?